to go back to my office. It's been a bit of a saga, should we say, this year, so I do apologise for the lateness. Anyway, I think are we ready?
Yes.
Anyway, well, good evening. Thank you all for coming this evening. This is it's the first meeting of the year. I do these meetings on a quarterly basis throughout the constituency. The purpose of them is for me to listen primarily, in that your questions matter. It's extremely easy to be in Westminster detached from reality. In fact, I sometimes think that's why the policies are what they are, is because they do seem so far removed from mainstream Britain. And so I quite enjoy these meetings in order to listen to what actually people are bothered about. And they also serve as an opportunity for me to tell you what I think. And I will endeavour to be as candid as possible. And wherever possible, where appropriate, I will say, this is my personal opinion, and this is the position of the coalition government, and if there's any difference, this is the position of the Conservative Party, because there are obviously there can sometimes be differences between on each issue. And that's it really. I sort of view this type of forum, and indeed the putting pints sessions that I do behind the bar on a regular basis, talking to constituents. I use it all as an exercise in trying to regain trust of the electorate, because trust in itself has eroded in British society. It's not just the trust of politicians, it's also the trust of the BBC, the trust of print journalists after the hacking affair, and this week it's the trust of hospital managers, and we have the trust of TV personalities. I mean, there are lots of things have happened in British society over the last few years, and I think everyone's looking around going, well, who do I believe? Who can I trust to make decisions on my behalf? So part of the process of trying to regain trust in the political process post the expenses scandal, etc., this is my sort of part, my approach is to try and talk to people and get them to trust me, and to also respect that decisions sometimes can be quite difficult in politics. I had a very difficult decision this week on Tuesday evening with regards to the same-sex marriage bill. It can be difficult, and it can sometimes be very difficult to get over to the people a sort of a proper explanation about what I think, because the media will take one quote often out of context. If you get on the radio, you get 1 or 2 minutes. If you get on television, you're lucky to get 30 seconds. So it's extremely difficult to get over what you truly think about through the media. And so I choose to do this as much as possible in order that people can understand what I'm about and what I think. Anyway, enough of me ranting on. First question, please.
All right, I'll start.
Okay.
This is a very general question. To me, it's quite important. What is the grand plan? What are we doing to get there? And will we like it when we arrive? I'm actually looking, if you like, 10, 20, 30 years ahead.
Sure.
Because I'm not liking what I see at the present moment in general.
Is that, I mean, that's a pretty broad question. Do you have anything particularly in mind in terms of the country's direction, or is there some area that's...
It's really how do you visualise what this country's going to be doing in 20 or 30 years' time.
Yep.
Are we going to have full employment?
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to have increased population, reduced population?
Yep.
How are we actually going to survive in this world where things seem to be going wrong very, very fast?
I think you asked a fantastic question, actually. The other thing, the problem with these events is that I have a tendency to be candid, which is sometimes a bit of a handicap in politics. I'm not convinced that the ground plan exists. I have yet to meet a strategic thinker in Whitehall. I don't know if they exist. As I've just said to you about the Energy Bill Committee, there's some merit to it, but is there a grand strategy? Is there a real sense of the pressing need for us to become as energy independent as a country as possible? I don't see much evidence of it. I look at a decision to build a high-speed rail link, and I ask myself, is that necessarily a priority? Why don't we spend, and it's 37 billion for that, why don't we spend 20 billion putting fibre optic cabling into every domestic industrial unit in the country? Because that's the new economy, isn't it? How come we haven't got a properly functioning hub airport? The parts of the world that are growing, you have to go by plane to. So we prioritise 15 minutes shaving off time between London and Birmingham in front of the hub airport and fibre optic cabling to every single property in the country. Strategic thinking, really, I can't really see it. And so, and your question about full employment, absolutely. I struggle to see at the moment how our economy can employ the number of people it's going to need to employ. I say that is because the pension age is, it's now going back to 66 by about 2019. Without wanting to lose all of my votes, I think that's a bit slow. The Germans are already at 67 now. And I think that if you start pushing back that retirement age, and I'm not expecting to retire at the moment because I think the scheme is going to collapse. So that being the case, you're going to be spending 40 to 50 years in employment. That means more and more jobs are required because you've got a longer lifespan of employment. And then you have to ask yourself, how does the economy deliver the jobs that someone over 60 can do? Because clearly when you're over 60, you're not as physically strong as you are when you're under 30. And then you ask yourself the sociological change of more women in work. How is that going to work? What type of work? It's quite sobering, sir. So I could be here all night talking about your question, but don't think that I don't think about it. I haven't even mentioned finite resources, population density, hitting 7 billion as a planet early, which means we'll hit 8 billion people on this earth early, all scrabbling around for finite resources, for food, for water, the potential conflict scenarios that come out of that. It's difficult. And I actually think that where you're right is that actually what we need is that strategic vision, is that grand plan. But I'll finish on a point of reality for a politician, is that I have to exist in a world where every minute of every day someone can post a comment about what I've just said or thought or whatever. And so does David Cameron. And increasingly politicians are looking 24 hours in front, not 24 days or 24 weeks or months or years. They're looking increasingly at a short window, and they're worrying about their popularity. And that is a problem when it comes to strategic vision. Because if I decided I wanted a new hub airport tomorrow, how long is it going to take? If I decided to build a fleet of nuclear reactors, which I would do tomorrow, how long is it going to take? And the fibre optic cable and everything else, it takes time. But in 2015, I have to go to the people, as do every other member of Parliament, to get votes. And most people want Jan now, not Jan in 10 years' time. I think. Maybe I'm being harsh. And so that's the difficulty with having this sort of vision that I know we need, but the political reality makes it very, very difficult to implement. Sorry, just gentleman at the back and then gentleman later.
In view of the situation regarding retirement homes, nursing homes and whatever, which seem to be increasingly expensive, increasingly rare and more and more difficult, and there appears to be no plan to do much about that. A group of local people, some of which are here, have thought about building our own nursing home, so that we can form a group to own it, run it, live in it, ultimately. Is there anything in government policy that would help us do that, or would directors give us help on planning, money, whatever?
First of all, congratulations. I think it's a fantastic idea.
It's a good idea. That's
With regards to financing, it's allow me to be to challenge you back. Okay, and I'll quote a few statistics to put it in context. Dementia is doubling in the next 10 years. Over 23-24% of the population is over 60. We have 1.2 trillion pounds worth of debt now. We have about a similar figure, 1.1 trillion pounds worth of unsecured debt. We have a pension system with liabilities of between 1 and 2 trillion, depending on the calculation, that we can't meet. There isn't any money really knocking around. What I would suggest to you is that responsibility for the care of the vulnerable, I think will have to go back onto families and to communities away from the state. It isn't a message that people particularly want to hear, but I think increasingly we're going to be looking after our elderly at home, and we're going to have to make provision for that. And I think those of us in the room who are taxpayers and working whatever, increasingly we're going to have to save more for our own social care needs in the future. I wouldn't say ashamed, because I wasn't particularly surprised, but the latest social care decisions, we are still kicking this can down the road. And there's no easy solution to this. The pension age of 65, when it was introduced, life expectancy was 68. It's now 84 for all. The idea that the country can afford for people to be paid pensions for 25 years is clearly baloney, particularly when you have a diminishing tax take and a diminishing position economically relative to the rest of the world. And so I don't think you're going to get a huge wad of cash from the state to set up your home. Where I think it is a good idea is because people have actually started to think about it and think, well, we need to think about something for ourselves on a community level. And what I will take back is a question to Ian Duncan-Smith and say, look, this idea has come to me from a group of constituents, and we've thought about the possibility of match funding or some sense of ownership of a community asset to provide the type of care that we're all going to need when we grow older. I think it's a more sensible solution. It's the most sensible suggestion I've heard in this area in many a year. We can't keep looking to the state. The state is bust. Or certainly if it's not bust, it's on the way to being so. I stress to you again, I do this every time, the state's debt is doubling under this Parliament. Doubling under this Parliament. Alright? So when you start talking about austerity Britain and cuts, and all the other stuff that you hear in the papers, yes, there have been some difficult decisions, but the state's debt is doubling. And that isn't because of the bankers, but that certainly didn't help. It's because as a society we have been on a trend toward unsustainable living for decades. Decades. So when you look at your children and your grandchildren, just be thinking, well, how are they going to survive? How are they going to get on? And if you add into the mix the cost of homes, and if the average age is now 38 in this country to buy your first home, not a house, home. So we're expecting a generation to incur debt at university, never own a home, pay loads of tax so that others can be retired in 25 years. I tell you what, I'd be on the plane. It's not a good deal. And so I encourage you in your pursuit of this, because I'll support you if you want me to write to me, and I'll write on and say, have we thought about this? Because increasingly communities up and down the country are going to have to start looking at themselves and saying, right, how can we all come together to look after the truly vulnerable in our society? Because we can't keep looking towards the state, because the state is falling apart.
Thank you.
Yes, I've got to go again for Peter.
How can we get some honesty back into the world? Because you and I think most people here have a common sense approach on HS2. How does it justify itself?
Yes.
We all know that there's bad news coming down, but it doesn't seem to get broadcast properly.
No.
Even the BBC, the venerable institution with an old Tory as chairman, seems to take the slant away from the real news. So
Yes.
we're being spun all the time.
Yes.
And and we're beginning to live in a real fool's paradise. Isn't that worrying?
It does. In fact, what you touch upon, Peter, is the difficulty of existing, that I find existing in the environment of Westminster, that media political bubble that spins around, that swirls around, and that you're looking for truth. Where do you get truth from? It's extremely difficult. And also, there are so many different sources of information now. Everybody's got a smartphone, they've got a Twitter feed, which is like a news feed, Facebook is like a news service, and then you've got all of the traditional forms of media coming in a variety of ways, be it television or radio or print journalism. There's so much that trying to look through it and go, well, actually, what is going on? And I think that's, I think you make a very good point. I'm not a big BBC basher. I think the BBC, on balance, is a wonderful institution, and I think if you compare it to the rest of the world, it has a lot of merit. But there are agendas at play in the BBC, and I think they would regularly admit that, and that the editorial sometimes is not always, particularly from my political perspective, balanced. And I think that is an issue when you're trying to deal with some profound challenges as energy, aging, and the like. Because the public cannot make considered judgments without actually having some grasp, some access to some basic facts. And the point I made about the state, the debts of the state doubling in this Parliament. Now, I was amazed actually when I first said that at one of these meetings about 12 months ago. The shock in the room, because people didn't know, they hadn't realised. Now, I actually would criticise frontline politicians for not having been honest about that, because that figure is publicly available. It's not as if it's hidden away. It's all just famous. It's in when the budget appears. It's published online. Everybody knows about it if they go looking for it. But most people lead extremely busy lives. It's bad enough just getting the kids to school, getting to work, coming home, putting the food on the table, looking at the domestic bills, looking at the heat and energy bills, and always doing this, going, oh my God, how am I going to get through to next week? That's the normal sort of existence. So asking them then to log on, check out this year's budget, and go through all of the figures, they're not going to do it. So there is a responsibility upon someone like me, Peter, to tell it as it is, to actually come out and say, this is how it is. And this is I'll give you an example. I asked a question to the Prime Minister on Wednesday in the Mid-Staffordshire Hospital statement, and I made reference to the former Chief Executive of the hospital. I then made reference to the Chief Executive of the hospital, Heatherwood and Wexham, and I declared that there was an £80 million debt in Heatherwood and Wexham Park NHS Trust. I didn't know that wasn't something that people knew. I rather sort of naively put it out as a press release, and you can imagine this now. Now, I think it's important that people know that. I actually think it's important they know that so they understand why I keep talking about how we've got too many hospitals. Because Heatherwood and Wexham Park NHS Trust is unviable. Okay? It was a business, it's gone out of business a long time ago. Okay, so that's the truth. It might not be what you want to hear, but it's the truth. And what I'm trying to do, it doesn't necessarily affect so much here because you've got Frimley. They don't think that Frimley won't need to murder somebody. Because it will, at some point. And then you have that whole open debate of where do they merge to. And I've tried to be honest from the outset, since prior to my election. Indeed, some people in here will know it was prior to my selection about hospitals in the area and the challenges that we faced. But I get quite a lot of stick for it, because the problem is that I'm a sort of lone voice trying to tell the truth, and others don't, other organisations, media, they don't really put it out there in the same way. And that's a problem. It's a challenge, but no one forced me to do this, so I recognise it's part of the responsibility. Sorry, Madam, I should have come to you.
No, that's okay. Dr. Lee, in the 1970s, I voted for a common market only.
Yeah.
Who now runs this country? Is it Brussels? Is it our own government?
It depends. I don't know if you all heard the question. The lady voted for a common market in 1975 and now doesn't. And the implication is she doesn't think we run our own country.
No, I don't.
It depends which area. There are some areas where Europe rears its ugly head, and there are other areas where it doesn't. So it's not as simple as they're running the country. I'll give you an example this week. I have a meeting tomorrow with somebody who runs a fireworks business. It's based in Brandon, a business that's been running since 1971, I think. Just, last year, I think it was about 10 months ago, the then Secretary of State, so it's before Chris Huhne left DEC, so whenever that was, because it was Ed Davey, who's now changed jobs. When he was the Secretary of State, he signed off on this directive, the EU directive, on fireworks. And in one fell swoop has potentially destroyed the fireworks industry in this country. Because it's to do with safety requirements of fireworks. And there's now an EU directive on safety for fireworks. Now it actually turns out, the little I've read about it, that the British safety standards are actually higher. Okay? So I get this letter, and a few others of members, and anyway, I've now written Minister urgent meeting next week, blah, 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 blah. A classic example of how an organisation interferes and is destructive, potentially destructive of British industry. And hopefully we'll be able to get them to rescind it next week. That's the plan. Otherwise, no fireworks for Guy Fawkes Day, apparently, because all the orders are made in February. So it's, one example. Another example is the EU Working Time Directive on doctors' hours, which has a profound effect upon training in